Good morning, everyone. So, if you guys remember back at the service auction, there was an item that was up for bid, which was a choose your own sermon for any service, and Phillip would be beholden to do your sermon topic on that. So, the sermon today is actually listed as TBD because I had this crazy idea to put him under a little bit of stress and have it become a choose your own adventure sermon topic that was also pretty much improvised. So we didn't want any preparatory, we didn't want a bunch of facts and figures. I wanted you guys to experience some of my favorite pieces of Phil, which are the pure unfiltered moments when you get this brilliant man to start giving you his perspective and his take on how the world works. So with that in mind, I have been reading the Celestine Prophecy again, and I'm not sure who here is there's probably a lot of folks familiar with it. It's very UU, and it's probably what led me to become UU in my life. Back in 1995 was the first time I experienced that. In my senior year of high school, it was a very, very trying time for me. My parents had just been divorced. My grandfather, who was like the greatest figure in my life, had just passed away. And I found this book, and it really reinforced and brought me back to spirituality and gave me a great feeling there. Just this year, I've had just a tremendous amount of crazy chaos happen, and just the last few months have been very trying. And I happened to look under my bookshelf, and here's this old battered copy of the Celestine Prophecy sitting there with no cover anymore. And I'm like, I should probably give that thing a read. And I started reading it again, and it really started to just sing to me as far as, oh my God, this is what I need right now. So it was really brilliant. And based on that, I've had a couple of topics that have, kind of come out of it for me that I think are good topics to hear Phil's take on. So, here we go. He gets to choose.
Yeah, so just to clarify, and I will affirm this, I have no idea what I'm preaching on today. Right now, at 11:15, I have no idea what this sermon is going to be. Eric's going to give me these two topics. I've got a fully charged cell phone in my pocket, and so what's going to happen is for the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to choose one of these topics, I'm going to go to the alcove, and I'm going to start writing furiously and hopefully put together a sermon that will work. This was not my idea. This is Eric's. This may be the worst sermon you're ever going to hear from me. I'm not proud of that fact, but this is what he purchased. This is what he won with the service auction, so I'm going to honor that request. So I'm a little scared.
All
right,
should be.
So I got two choices. I've got two choices.
Right? Hold on, we got a question.
Oh, there's a question.
The Celestine Prophecy is the first one. Then there's a whole series of books and websites and groups and everything.
All right, so let's go ahead. I'm curious. Let's hear these two topics.
Yeah, and by the way, if you're not happy with the way this sermon turns out, outbid me this year.
I was going to say blame you, but yeah.
You can blame me then, outbid me this year and do it yourself. All right, here we go.
Okay.
So topic one, in the Celestine Prophecy, and I made him cards, so he gets to take those with him, so he has a written version of this. Topic one, in the Celestine Prophecy, some of the biggest things that it speaks about, and it was, again, late 90s, it speaks of a global spiritual awakening that would be occurring at the start of the new millennium. In your opinion, do you think we are in the midst of experiencing this phenomenon, since it's 2016, or have we, as a society, grown farther away from that global consciousness? So that was topic one. That's a light one. Topic two, I started to reflect on, the fact that I've now lived through that millennial turn and some of the other things that I think I'm going to live through in my lifetime. In my lifetime, I believe there is a very real possibility of us making contact with other life in our universe. If or when this happens, what do you think this will do to the globally practiced religions of the world? I.e., Christianity believing Adam and Eve were the source of creation here, or Islam believing the Prophet Muhammad and Allah, or the Wiccans believing that the earth and Gaia is the supreme force of the whole universe. Just as this shift in religious beliefs as science proved that earth was not the center of the universe, this would have dramatic impacts on creationism and religious dogma that tends to only deal with the earth as the center of all humanity. So those are your two topics. I promised I would keep it light. I tried.
You're sure there's not a third option that you maybe have in your back pocket? No, it's good. No, actually,
what do you think of Star Wars?
No, I could do that with the second one. That's all aliens and stuff. Okay. Okay. Here's what I'm gonna do. I like to challenge myself, so and I'm also a really bad poker player. I've been told this several times. So you probably all saw my reactions to those two topics. The one that was the most disconcerting and scary was the second one, and so I think that's the one I'm going to choose. So I'm going to go hide over here and take care of that,
Nice.
and you've got the service, my friend.
All right, thanks. All right.
Would have been real easy to let that meditation go for about another 10 minutes. So I'm glad to be here this morning. As some of you who follow me on Facebook know and whatnot, I have been up in Chicago doing convocation with Meadville Lombard Theological School, which is a UU identity seminary up in Chicago. And it has been an amazing time for me to kind of recharge my batteries, learn some new insights, get more grounded in my own faith. But I almost didn't make it because the flight out of Chicago last night that was coming straight to Jacksonville got canceled because of this thing called a winter storm, which as a Floridian, I didn't quite understand how those two words go together. I just assumed it must be some sort of hurricane made of snow, which apparently it was. Snow falling out of the sky. It was bizarre. Thankfully, I was able to make it out, and I got here about 11 o'clock last night, so I'm happy to be here and happy to do this. I'm actually excited to have the opportunity to deliver a sermon in which I was not able to prepare. I've never delivered a sermon or a speech with only 15 minutes of prep time, so I'm as excited by this as I hope all of you are. As I was in Chicago talking to some of my colleagues, both seminarians and ministers, I mentioned to them that I was doing this, and by and large, this look of horror and shock came over their faces, and one of them said to me that I literally have nightmares about that scenario happening at my church, and you're excited about it. I guess I'm a bit of a masochist. So let's take a look at the question that I have received, the prompt that I have received. It's written on this lovely card. I'm going to go ahead and read it to you verbatim. In my lifetime, Eric's, I believe there is a very real possibility of us making contact with other life in our universe. If and when this happens, what do you think it will do to the globally practiced religions of the world? Christianity, Adam and Eve, creationism, Muslim Muhammad, Gaia, etc. So my answer to this question, what will happen to these globally practiced religions if and when extraterrestrial life lands on this planet or we find it out in outer space? My answer is absolutely nothing. I'm not saying that glibly. That is my actual response. I'm going to take a look at this question from two different angles. I'm going to very broadly separate religions into two camps: fundamentalism, or fundamentalists, and liberals. Let's first take a look at what might happen, this little thought experiment. What might happen should we encounter extraterrestrial life? What will be the response of the fundamentalist community, whether that is fundamentalist Christian, fundamentalist Muslim, fundamentalist Judaism, whatever you have there. We don't need to speculate too far because we have seen it throughout history. Repeatedly, we have had manifold scientific discoveries that to an open, reasonable, rational mind clearly contradict dogma and doctrine that has been held in the hearts and minds of those who practice fundamentalist religion. And what has always generally been the response? It has been a response of deny and rationalize. I remember back when we first discovered dinosaurs. I wasn't alive back then, so I don't remember that. But I remember reading in college how that discovery of these gigantic dinosaur bones threw the religious right, the conservative Christians in the 1800s into a tumult because they didn't know how to make sense of this in light of their understanding of the creation story that was literally understood out of the book of Genesis in the Bible. It was a mini crisis of faith for those Christians of the day. And what we saw happening in the religious writings, and that some people still hold to today, is they straight up deny the existence of dinosaurs. I was driving home from Tennessee a couple of weeks ago listening to talk radio, and I actually heard someone on the radio reporting about an NCAA football player who is playing for one of the teams in one of the bowl games this season say, "I straight up don't believe in dinosaurs. It doesn't make any sense." I can't make any sense of it. No. So, when we are faced with this kind of response to science, to things that seem unassailably true, and we yet see that millions, if not billions, of religious folks can still turn a deaf ear and a blind eye to that information and continue to believe whatever they believe, that's why I say absolutely nothing when it comes to religious fundamentalists. We've seen it with dinosaurs, with evolution, with global warming. To this day, let's take a look at liberals now. My answer still holds, absolutely nothing. Why? Because what liberals do, what religious liberals do, when they are confronted with new insight, new information, new revelation, we incorporate it. And in many ways, I would say that distinction is the defining distinction between religious fundamentalists and religious liberals. When we discover new truths from sources like science, we don't say, whoa, 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 no. We say, yes, and how can I take this new truth and have it work in conjunction with what I already know? And in extreme cases, if it completely displaces what we thought we knew, then it must be so, because we honor the search for truth, a responsible search for truth wherever that search will take or lead us. That is what religious liberals do, and that is why I am proudly a religious liberal. So, absolutely nothing. What do I mean? Because we'll just do, as religious liberals, what we have always done. We will take the new revelation and find a way to incorporate it rather than rationalize it or deny it. As I talk about this a little bit, I start thinking the next step. Not just about, what are aliens going to look like, although that's a really cool question. But as I start to ponder and see again this divide between fundamentalists and liberals, I'm a little saddened because I see this pattern having existed for so long, and I also recognize that it seems right now today, especially here in America in 2016, we are seeing an increasing divide, an increasing polarization that is occurring between those who self-identify as conservative or fundamental and those who identify as liberal or progressive. And this ongoing polarization, it frightens me because I'm seeing a lot of weird stuff happen in our shared world that I think is directly related to the anxiety that is being created by this divide. I think what we're seeing happening in Oregon is a result of this polarization. I think that the violence we're seeing in our streets, the fear and the anxiety, many of the evils and wickedness that we are seeing on the news every day is coming as a result of this increasing polarization. I don't have the article, I only had 15 minutes, but I do encourage you to look it up on Google. I believe it was in the Atlantic that actually demonstrated through scientific data and research that there actually is a measurably, an objectively measurable polarizing effect happening as it relates to political viewpoints in this country. This is not just a theory or something to talk about at the water cooler. This is actually happening. I blame outlets like Fox News and MSNBC for the liberals in us here. We have a selective bias. We like to reinforce our own thoughts and ideas with information that is simply going to buttress what we already believe because it's comfortable. And now with the explosion of media, different ways that you can now go and find the exact voice that you want to hear, there are so many different echo chambers that are now available to us in mass media. On Facebook, you can filter the feeds you listen to. You hear someone that disagrees with you, stop following them, right? And so we all then tend to gravitate towards these echo chambers where we never have to hear a voice of dissent. And I'll say this on the liberal side, that process is not in line with our own liberal principles. And so to my liberal friends, my friends that I call liberal and progressive religionists, of which UUism certainly is a part, we cannot allow ourselves to do that. We must avoid the echo chamber. So what I'm interested in is how can we help to bridge that divide? How do we put an end to this polarization that is so detrimental to our future as a nation, as a people, as a species, human beings? And I'll bring in something that I heard while I was at Convocation in Chicago that really struck me. I thought this was fascinating. Let's go back to one of those theories, one of those, let's not call it a theory, one of those proven scientific facts that so many on the religious spectrum, the religious right side of the spectrum, have denied. Let's talk about global warming and climate change. So there was a fascinating story that came out about 2010, I believe, about a small area in Kansas, where I am from. There were about 6 or 7 towns in this small area of Kansas. They all worked with one electrical company, and liberals and scientists and others had come to them and said, you know what, global warming is happening. We've got to find ways to conserve our energy consumption. This is good for the species, is good for the world. Let's do this. And of course, Kansas, if you've never been there, is oppressively conservative in many ways. And sadly, they are some of the folks that really buck against science hard. They were some of the same folks that still try to get evolution or try to kick evolution out of the science textbooks in the public schools. So there is definitely a bit of an allergic reaction to science in Kansas, unfortunately. But as they were trying, so yeah, they were pushing forward with this, trying to tell people, hey, stop using so much energy, global warming is a reality, climate change is happening, we've got to drop our carbon levels. Please, for the sake of all that is good and holy, drop your consumption levels. And the Kansans scoffed. We don't believe in all of that voodoo and mumbo jumbo. Global warming is a conspiracy, so they rejected it out of hand. Well, those that were in a position of policy and power in Kansas came to realize this is a no-go. If we keep trying to fight this battle on that battleground, according to those terms, that no, this is science and the science is true and you must accept it, all rational people accept this, so be rational, they weren't going to get anywhere. So they changed tactics. What they realized, and it's something that I still hold in my heart today, is that most disagreements are oftentimes the confluence of differing sets of values, and sometimes the prioritization of those values. So what I mean by this is that for the liberals and scientists, and those of us that want to see an end to global warming, or at least some sort of slowdown, we tend to value science. We tend to value rationality. We tend to value the continuation of our species, because many of us don't necessarily believe that there's a heaven waiting for us when we all die. So for these reasons, we promote the idea that global warming is a fact of science that must be dealt with. Conservatives, especially those in Kansas, don't necessarily hold that value. Science isn't as valuable to them. But here is a value that is incredibly important to all Kansans, one that is still important to me, and I'm proud that it is. It's the idea of conservation and thrift. Now, there is a value that probably all of us can agree upon and nod our heads to. So those in policy positions in Kansas realize that we're arguing the wrong way here. Instead of arguing that science says global warming is happening and you need to get on the bus, they instead went to these small towns in Kansas and said, hey, good Kansans who believe in thrift and conservation, why are you spending all this money on, electricity and oil that is, it's a poor use of your resources. It's poor stewardship of the good gifts that God has given us. And then you take it one step further. Our reliance upon foreign oil is bad for national security, isn't it? Now we were talking in a language that these conservative folks in Kansas could understand. And in just a couple of years, I think it was a couple of years, they dropped their consumption rate by 5%. That doesn't sound like much, but let me explain something to those of you who don't understand how this works. If any type of area in the country, a city or a rural community, if they can drop their electrical consumption by 1.5%, that is considered a massive success. The 5% drop that we saw in this Kansas community was almost unheard of. And we got there not by forcing them to accept our scientific views, but by finding the values that would speak to them. And so as I look at the increasing polarization that is happening in our country today, I wonder, can that principle be more generally applied? I generally don't talk too specifically about political candidates from this pulpit, and that's by design. I do talk about political ideas. I'm happy to do that, but since I've got a good excuse of not having had a chance to prepare for this sermon, I might do that. I'm scared as hell of Donald Trump. He scares me bad. At first it was funny, you know, it was kind of a sideshow and it was very funny, but then he kept getting more and more popular, and now he could become the Republican candidate for president in a system that is tragically built to be a two-party system, and that is a frightening prospect. But I will say this, I nevertheless get upset and anxious when I hear people on the left side of the spectrum just insulting and disparaging those who follow Trump. I disagree with them a lot, and there are some truly dangerous and hateful and fearful ideas that are being propagated, but simply cutting off that section of humanity to say, well, they're this or they're that, isolating them, not maintaining relationship with them, ending the conversation, I don't think that's the answer. In fact, I think that might be the recipe that could get someone like Trump elected. I think we must, as liberals, pursue a strategy of continued engagement with those with whom we disagree. And we may not necessarily come to see eye to eye, but if we can find shared values, then we can come to a place where we can, at the very least, work together towards certain common goals. One thing I think about when it comes to Trump supporters, and again, I read The Atlantic quite a bit, so The Atlantic had a great article on this, and I could not find it in the 15 minutes I had over here. But they mentioned that in doing some demographic research on those who support Donald Trump as president, that one of the values that is most important to them is the idea of work and the idea of getting what you deserve. The problem is that the narrative that many of these folks have spun for themselves is that immigrants and other people that have received alleged benefits from the government for being impoverished or whatever, that they are lazy, that they do not work, and therefore they are not deserving of all of these programs of government assistance. In fact, we should kick them out of the country if we can because they're not real Americans, because they don't work. I disagree with that assessment, but I see some hope there because I think that that is a place where we might be able to change their minds because the world is full, America is full of the working poor. So many people that have just been completely labeled as being lazy and not willing to work. That is so not true, and it is so easy to find examples where that is not the case. So if we can find ways to take that narrative and affirm, I hear what you're saying, you're scared because of the changes that are happening, you're scared of what you stand to lose as we march towards a new millennium, but guess what? Your hard work will be rewarded. Your hard work will pay off, and these people you're demonizing, they're hard workers too. Let me show you how they are hard workers. Then I believe that there is hope, and I believe that we can turn this crazy train around right now. As I start to get towards 12 o'clock here, I will say, to get a little bit closer back to Eric's original question, as I had deviated a little bit from the alien question, I will say this. I am in awe of this universe that we share. And since I'm always here, I've never been outside of this universe, so it's kind of the water I swim in. It's the water you all swim in. It's so easy to forget What a miracle this place is. And I don't care if you're an atheist or an agnostic, I'm going to use the word miracle because it just boggles my mind. It's funny because I think that actually evolution as a process, when you stop to think about it, in many ways, is more miraculous than the idea of a 7-day creation story by some god sitting on a cloud plucking a harp. When I think that there are these little single-celled organisms that over millions and billions of years kept coming together and growing in complexity, moving towards some type of consciousness that then allowed us to be able to manipulate and change our own environment, to be able to create all that we, as children of creation, have created, it's amazing. And to take a step back and to stand in awe and wonder of that and to puzzle over it and to celebrate it, I think that's something that Unitarian Universalism does very well. And so I want to thank Eric for giving me the opportunity this morning to take a step back and reflect upon the absolute miracle that is this crazy thing we call life. I don't understand it, and I'm glad I don't understand it. But I will say this as it relates to aliens. One thing that I see on this planet is I see the replication of patterns. Everywhere, in science, in the natural world, I see, and I think you see, the replication of patterns. How amazing that we live in a universe where patterns so replicate. And if that is true, that our universe is one that replicates patterns, this pattern that we call life, surely it has been replicated somewhere else, out there. So I agree with Eric. I think someday we are going to run into some form of extraterrestrial life. I hope they're intelligent. I hope they come and visit us. I hope they bring food. I hope they will bring us new insights that will give us an opportunity as a species to evolve, that they will give us new truths that we can give our yes and to. Blessed be.